I had the academic path, but I've always stayed connected to an intuitive, knowing, indigenous part of me. I used to farm a lot, and it wasn't written. It wasn't a book. It wasn't a permaculture class. It was just a knowing. I learned that things worked together in a systemic way. Your food, your stress level, your time to reset and digest is all important in epigenetics. It's all important to get your body to settle down, reset, digest, be in nature. And so when I started looking into that, we lost a lot of time. And so the processed foods became the go-to. And so how are you going to be in relationship with your present moment? You know, how are you be in relationship with the trees, with your friends, with your family? That affects the well-being of everybody. So we got to look at our family dynamics and time, and that is so important to our well-being. You know, a time to, to just be. That's so important.
Welcome to the FutureKind podcast, where conscious nourishment is our guide. From the cellular to the cosmic, we're exploring how our relationship with food has the power to transform the world. Now settle down, my dear, while you take a while to rest. Dr. Rasheeda Hawk, welcome to the FutureKind podcast.
Thank you.
I am so grateful to be here with you today. And I was thinking about our very first conversation years ago when we were connected by a mutual, an employee of the Non-GMO Project who had connected with you at a conference. And he was like, you need to talk to this woman. And our first conversation was a lot around epigenetics, which I had just started studying and reading books about, but you are actually a researcher in. And it still feels so relevant to me that this idea that the food that we engineer might influence gene expression in ways that we don't fully understand. And I'd love to start with just if you could explain a little bit for people who might not be familiar with what epigenetics is, just explaining that to us.
Okay, I think I'll explain it in such a way so it won't be so academic. Well, I was academic. So I was in graduate school, and it was right around the time where the whole human genome map was mapped out. So now we know every gene in the human body. And so like a typical graduate student, I was tired. I was kind of dozing off in class, to be honest with you. But the professor, when he talked about, how you learn in school, this gene means this outcome. He said, well, there's another layer on top of genetics. It's called epigenetics, that there's other factors that influence the outcome. And I don't know, it just woke me up because it's like, that makes more sense. Like, it's not that easy. This means that, but there's other factors that influence the outcome. And that was my initial interest in epigenetics.
And so what are some of those things that influence gene expression besides just the DNA?
Well, now that in this year, 2025, the whole field of epigenetics exploded since, was that early 2000s. Now you can hear about epigenetics and psychosis and epigenetics and mental health and epigenetics and cancer. And it just means that there are other factors, nutrition, stress, environment, toxins, that affects those regulatory factors where the gene makes this outcome. So it's not a straight line, gene makes outcome, but there's other factors in our food, in our environment, toxins, GMOs that affect that outcome. So I didn't go into the very specifics, but that's the gist of the big picture.
Yeah, thank you. I find it so fascinating because it seems so obvious and intuitive in a way, but also, like you're saying, it's so counter to what many of us were initially taught, that just like gene expression is just a factor of inherited genetics. I would love to hear more about like what were you in grad school for and just like your path of what has interested you in your scientific studies.
Okay, so I always loved science, but when I went to grad school, I didn't have like a topic. I wanted to study cancer. I want to study autoimmune diseases. So I picked biophysics. And biophysics, people are like, what is that? We pretty much do everything from the instrumentation of how things done and how to integrate things. So I'm like, yeah, that fits me. So what caught my interest was that? Was that your question? Like, how do I get
Yeah.
around?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just one of these kids that just love science. I just love science.
Mhm.
It wasn't one of these things that my parents said, oh, you're going to be a scientist. I think my first science project, I was in fifth grade and I wanted to purify water. And that's a funny story in itself, but I want to purify water. I don't know why
I
that
want
came
to hear
up.
the story. Why? What did you do? Tell us.
Well, no, I mean, that's back in the days where, I'm aging myself. We didn't have internet, so I had to go to the library. So
Uh-huh.
I'd go to the library. I got all these books, and there was this one particular books on how do you use rocks to purify water. I said, that's insane. So I just had got sand. I looked at all these pictures. We had an encyclopedia, and I just made this like kind of filter funnel with cotton and coffee and filters and sand. And I took dirty water and I put it in front through the filter and it purified it. And likely, and that's what some countries in Africa, some people use to purify water. But the funny story is, I mean, years later, when I became a professor and I was teaching an environmental chemistry class, one of my students had to give, the students had to give a report. And her report was on this area that they called, I think it was called Toxic Water Valley, Toxic Valley. And she was showing these pictures. She's showing these pictures on her presentation. And I'm like, I know that bridge. I know this scene. I know this lake. I said, is this in Port Huron? That's where I was born, right across from Canada. She said, yeah. I'm like, I know that. So I asked my mom. And she said, yeah, the Dow Chemical Company was on the Canadian side and the water got polluted. And a lot of people lost their firstborn child because of the toxins in the water. So I'm like, what a coincidence that my first project was around water. And then I lived across where this big, horrible, toxic leak happened in St. Clair River that connected Lake Huron and some other places. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because knowing you a bit, I would say like maybe it's a coincidence, but also I remember from that very first conversation, like you're like, I would consider that also probably representative of your strong intuition. And one of the things that struck me from that very first conversation with you is how you have this like very robust academic scientific background. And then you are also still really holding the value of intuition and like all these other ways of knowing. And I'm curious if there's anything that you want to share about that. And maybe specifically, like, what do you think has allowed you to stay in relationship with those other ways of knowing, even through like a very rigorous academic career?
Yeah, that's true about me. I mean, I have the academic path, but I've always stayed connected to an intuitive, knowing, indigenous part of me. And I would say spending a lot of time with my grandparents who were sharecroppers, and they both, I think, went as far as fifth grade. So they didn't go to middle school or high schoolers. And they lived where they lived near Detroit, outside of Detroit, in Port Huron. They used to farm a lot. And I used to just learn a lot from them, and it was just a knowing. And it wasn't written, it wasn't a book, it wasn't a permaculture class, it wasn't this. It was just a knowing. And I think that intuitive knowing and connection of what the seasons were like, or the days were like, or what to plant, or what to harvest, is something that I learned as a child. Now, my grandfather was also a healer, so that kind of introduced me to the medical side. I would say he was my first anatomy professor because when he used to go fishing, the little fish that he didn't like, it sounds gross, I used to dissect them.
Uh-huh. You're a scientist. You've
I'm
already
a scientist,
explained that.
but he would point out different things about the fish. I mean, it wouldn't go to waste. Nothing went to waste. You know, we fed the feral cat. You know, we had feral cats. Nothing went to waste. So I think that side of me of knowing it was something that I learned as a child. So, you know, I was just thinking just recently how, like in the winter times in Michigan was very cold and people were like, how do you farm in the winter? And not that he verbally expressed this, but around the fall before the snow started, I used to help him put hay out in different areas of the farm. And I thought it was because, he's going to feed the deer that come from the wood, which he did. But later, when I did take a permaculture class, I realized, hey, this is stuff we've always done. I don't need a class for this. The hay is like an insulator for all of the produce that grow underground. So you're building an underground refrigerator. The deer come out, they eat, they leave their droppings. You're fertilizing the ground. So when the snow melts and even the vegetables and stuff we don't eat, you know, we used to throw it on top of the hay. I'm thinking we're just feeding the deer, which we were. But you're composting the whole area. So when the snow starts to melt in the spring, the roots were preserved, the vegetables were preserved, and things come back up. So I'm saying that to say that everything, along with science and my research, I learned that things kind of worked together in a systemic way. And in the science, you got to know this. There's always an intuitive knowing. Sometimes you may work on a project, you can't read it, you just, as my father used to say, like, you're having a conversation with it. You know, like if I read a good book, and we used to share books, and I used to write in books. He said, you were having a conversation with it. So you're not just reading it, you're asking what the next question is. And I think that my experience as a child, the intuitive knowing and how I implement that kind of spilled over to my research as well.
I love that because I feel like what you're describing is like the true spirit of science, which is so different than the corporate science that often gets lifted up in our current culture, which is actually, like, in my opinion, fundamentally unscientific in that, like, it skips the principle of curiosity, which is the beginning of that conversation, right? Is like, if you have a predetermined outcome for financial reasons and you are going to make the study need to prove that point, like, that's not actually science. And of course, that's so much of what we've seen that supports the so-called safety of GMOs is it's corporate science, and it doesn't reflect a curiosity of what is actually like the systemic, integrated, and long-term impact of this, including on epigenetics, which, like, the field of epigenetics was like, I don't even know if it was established. It was at least nascent when the first genetic engineering started. So there wasn't even an awareness of, like, when we eat these foods where the DNA has been altered, that actually could change our gene expression. And that still hasn't really been studied in depth.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like, by the time I got into when I did my postdoctoral studies at Caltech, these are the conversations that I wanted to bring up, but it was kind of like squashed because if the funding wasn't there to support that, that kind of directs where your research goes to. So it was something I was kind of doing on the side. But my main research had to be behind what this project funded and what I was going to say, what I was going to do. But yeah, to your point, science, is we learn from George Washington Carver. People think, he just created peanut butter. But no, he was a biophysicist. He was a chemist. He was a surface material scientist because he used to meditate with the plants and say, what am I supposed to do with you? And that's also a very indigenous practice. It's like, I'm not saying like this is this and then you're going to become that. You just sit back and you observe and appreciate not knowing what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And that's where the area of creativity comes. And kind of to link that into epigenetics, which is kind of makes sound kind of far-fetched. yes, your gene is supposed to make this certain outcome, but epigenetics can also be a protective opportunity or a new opportunity to evolve into something else. So this is allowing your genes to really incorporate and have this relationship with the environment to say, we need to make more of this because this is dangerous for us.
Mm.
And microbes do this all the time, right? And so later on, when I got into bioremediation and using microbes to remove toxins from the soil, it's the same type of principle. Microbes want to live. But since they're just one little cell, they could say, we could switch up real quick, detoxify this lead and make it less toxic for us, and we can thrive. We can take these hydrocarbons and metabolize it, and we can grow. Now, humans are a little bit different. We don't see the big picture, but we really don't know what's happening at the nanomolar level. And I kind of was able to do a little bit of that work when I was doing breast cancer research and detecting the BRCA gene at the picomolar level. That's like a grain of salt and like an Olympic swimming pool. Like, at what point in your life is this BRCA gene that's supposed to protect you changing? Now, the next step would have been like, is something stressful on the outside causing this? Is there a GMO product causing this? Is there, but it's, research is interesting.
Still on. Yeah. Well, I mean, what you shared about the funding is, unfortunately, a all too familiar story. And I think a lot of people are aware, but maybe not everyone realizes that the state of what we have for like established quote unquote science is very driven by, it all requires money. And a lot of that money comes from corporations who have a specific interest in outcomes. And
it requires money. You have to publish. You have to publish what your peers are interested in or not. And you have to prove that point. So if the public conversation is like, oh, this doesn't exist, this doesn't matter, and a lot of the funding is coming to support genetically modified food, it's hard to get in those conversations. To even get papers even published, to say, hey, I proved this. Even if I found funding from outside, the same publish or perish, right? I have to get my science community to say, you're onto something.
From a personal perspective, from all of your learning and research, how do you, like in your own life, apply your understanding of epigenetics? How does it influence the daily choices that you make?
Well, I know that because my background's in biophysics, I also look at the energy of things.
Yeah.
And I do know that in the environment, there's so much energy around you. And so sometimes you're in an environment where things are not coherent or things are not incoherent. And I laugh because I work with youth and I teach them this and they're like, I'm not feeling you. So you're telling me things are not and are not incoherent. I love that because it's intuitive. You're saying this. You're saying that this relational space where we're in, something's not happening in this relational space. So what I'm saying is that your food, your stress level, your time to reset and digest is all important in epigenetics. It's all important to get your body to settle down, reset, digest. Be in nature. We're born of nature. Everything in nature is in our body. What's in our body is in nature. This is this reciprocal relationship that we don't take advantage of or don't know that we should. I work with youth and by the end of the summer, if I can get them to stop calling dirt and calling it soil, I've accomplished something, where they like, I put my hands in the dirt till I put my hands in the soil. That's a different conversation. And so knowing what I know about epigenetics, I do know that our chemical environment, what's in our house, what's in our soil, what energy is around us, what's supporting us, our foods, all that is important because the organization that I run is called Centropy, which is a physics term. We heard of entropy disorder, but Centropy is, we named it that, is everything that puts us back together. It's the opposite. So, yeah, in this field of disorder, what are the things that keeps us whole? What puts us back together? And then, you read stories about areas where people live to their 100 years old, whatever. One thing they have in common, they have community, they have green space, they have good food. They have family. And so using epigenetics in that realm, even in my clinical spaces or working with youth, it's just those little teaching moments of what keeps us healthy and whole.
I'm realizing as you're talking about that, I don't know a lot about biophysics, but it's sounding like quantum physics. Like there's, which I also I aspire to. I'm very curious about it, but just and I feel really compelled by what I am able to understand, which is that everything is almost entirely energy. And because that's harder to perceive with our five senses, it gets undervalued. But what I'm hearing you speak to is that field of energy that we not only exist in, but actually even physically are, that the quality of coherence in that energy field is a big influence on gene expression, which makes sense. But again, is not in our very materialist culture that puts all of the emphasis on the five senses. It might sound far-fetched, but I feel excited by the way even traditional academic scientific understanding is starting to be able to match up with that kind of more intuitive understanding that, of course, the level of coherence we are experiencing affects our wellness and even our gene expression.
Yeah. And biophysics goes all the way from subatomic particles to the whole being, to the environments. And that's why I picked that field, because I figured there'd be a spot for me in that big range somewhere, what I was interested in. And knowing me, I was like, I'll take it all. I'll do farming. I'll do this. I'll do that.
I remember you also sharing stories about didn't you used to do Qigong classes in your community gardens? Can you talk a little bit about I don't actually know. So you went to California for school and then you stayed in Southern California?
That's so interesting. So my mother got a scholarship from the Ford Motor Company, where most of my family worked in Detroit and Port Huron. So she got a scholarship. So we moved to Los Angeles. But I would go back and forth between Michigan and Los Angeles as a child. And when I was an adult, I moved back for at least 3 years or something like that. But so the classes, so we, from Centropy, we have a farming component called the Seeds of Carver, named after George Washington Carver. And so that just kind of came up organically. On weekends, was me and another mom. Our kids were the same age. They had some activity. We would be at the community center, and then someone else joined in. And we're like, hey, we need a community garden. We need this. We need that. And so LA, land here is like gold. So it's hard to find, even though there was open spaces, it was hard to find a spot. But there was a woman that said, hey, I have this apartment building right next to it. It's just I would say, not even a half an acre, maybe a quarter of an acre, a third of an acre, but it was big. It was big enough. And she's like, people just trash it. I had to spend so much money cleaning it. So we decided, hey, let's get the California Conservation Corps, get those youth to build a fence, get a fence, and we're going to just work this and make the boxes, and we turn it into a farm. And from there, community members were like, oh, I teach yoga. I want to teach yoga in the garden. Go have at it. Let's do Qigong. Hey, I love to learn that. I'm coming to the class. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just a community garden. It became like a collective farm, as we called it, meaning that this is just yours, this is just mine, but collectively we can have a green space, a farming space, a hangout space, for us. And so that's how that came about.
Beautiful. And then more recently, you've been delving into the field of functional medicine. Can you share a little of like what that is and your journey with that? And I mean, I'm hearing these through lines even from your childhood about your interest in food. And you've shared that your scientific interest has been really broad, but it seems like you obviously, you're on the Non-GMO Project board. I guess I should say that. So like you obviously care about the food system, and I'm just seeing convergence more and more of like your scientific considerations and the relationship between that and food. And I'm just curious how that's all coming together in your journey with functional medicine, and maybe for people just to describe a little bit about what that is.
Okay, so functional medicine is an integrative approach to medicine. It's really based on some indigenous practices, meaning like what nutrition affects our health, what stress factor affects our health. You look at the whole body. So in conventional medicine, you may have a cardiologist, may have an ears, nose, and throat doctor, you may have a foot doctor, but there could be a connection between all three. Mm-hmm. And so what functional medicine looks at your whole system. And so what originally got me interested in that, or how I stumbled across that, when I was at Caltech, and I can't think of the scientist's name, he's an older scientist, he's passed away. And I should know his name because he was the only person that got the Nobel Prize in chemistry and peace. Linus Pauling. I love Linus Pauling. So when I in Caltech, he had a lab there, and they made his lab like a little historical spot. So when I had free time, I used to just hang around there, right? And they had some of his old notebooks and stuff. And so they actually have a society, the Linus Pauling Society, called orthomolecular medicine. And I was like, what's that? So orthomolecular medicine, it really is biochemistry. Like, what are those little nutrients and molecules and things that we extract from food that keeps us healthy? And so that was, functional medicine had kind of, at that time, was more on stress and hormones. They didn't encompass that part. But then they did include that part as they were growing over the years. But really, it was in orthomolecular medicine. So since I studied physics and chemistry, it was more like, okay, what's in the foods? Because some of Linus Pauling's original publishings and science findings was like using zinc for depression and stuff like that. This was 1930 something. Wow. It's amazing. And what do we see now? Use this, use lion's mane, use this. So this is the stuff that he has been doing years ago. So that's how my interest in functional medicine came about. And just knowing that, it's kind of, we all hear this now, like nutrition is, I guess we hear this now. We always knew that how important nutrition is for our health. So I would say that when my mom got the scholarship to go to UCLA, she became a public health nurse. And so she's really big on nutrition and things like that. So that was my other exposure to the nutritional side, my grandparents, the farming side. And then I love the science. So it just kind of all went together.
You say that like we've always understood the relationship between nourishing food and health, but I'm still surprised by like not everyone actually knows that.
But I feel like true. That is true.
I think it also speaks to probably part of your background and maybe your mom's background of like even coming in as a nurse, that she had that awareness, because I think the like sad statistic is it's like, I think there's less than 5 days of nutrition related study that's just recommended for doctors out of all their years of study. That's just recommended. And a lot of them, like some significant percentage, don't even do that 5 days. So people are going into practice advising people on how to be healthy with actually no context about how food relates to that. So I know to you and I, and maybe a lot of people listening, it seems really obvious, but I have to always remind myself of like, it's not that obvious yet. And yeah, and what you've experienced, like as you've started to do clinical practice, like just what you've seen in terms of like how, what people do understand or where there are still like gaps in making that connection.
And that's a good point, because I do have to remember that my mother was a public health nurse. But then I think when I see patients, I think what comes to mind is like when and where was this knowledge dropped? Because I do remember when I was growing up, and I'm not that old, but what I'm saying is that to go to a fast food restaurant or a Burger King was a birthday treat. It wasn't an everyday thing. It was a once a year, oh my God, I have some French fries. But we've always cooked at home. And that was and we were in an odd family, in our neighborhood. Everyone cooked at home. We lived in a working class neighborhood where people were maybe a nurse, a teacher, post office, that type of neighborhood, right? And so people worked, but they still cooked. And so when I started looking into that and talking to people and patients about what they eat and how they eat, it's time. We lost a lot of time. And so the processed foods became the go-to. Now, speaking of time, the farmers were like, hey, this genetically modified food, my tomatoes won't go bad, and then I can still sell them, because there's this gene in there that keeps them from rotting. You know what I mean? So that's when, on the science side, and I remember being in school, this whole ethical debate, like, what about if you created a gene that kept the flower from dying? What if? And now here it is. And it's incorporated, like it's, it's time. And when I talk to parents, they got the kids in soccer, they got this, they're working. Both parents are working. I could say when I was growing up, at least half a year, one of my grandparents actually lived with us in Los Angeles. So when my parents were working, someone was cooking. So we got to look at our family dynamics and time, and then it became convenient. I think around the 70s when moms started going back into the workforce. Not like saying that's wrong, but how to justify for the loss in time, the food became processed, not canned, right? Because I grew up with my grandparents. I knew how to can, right? That's not processed. But processed with chemicals, making margarine instead of butter. Margarine, and it was introduced, and then the amount of heart attacks went up. You know what I mean? So the food chemistry, as you probably know, is an interesting field of its own. I'm not in that field, but it is very, very interesting. And from what I understand, their whole discipline is how to save time in processing food, how to make food taste good with these added chemicals. Now, I could be wrong, and I don't want to insult anybody. That's my limited understanding. Still, when I find the time, I'll branch into that and learn more about it. That's what I know. But it's not like people don't care. For some reason, that part of knowledge was lost. We were the family of slow cookers. My mom would throw stuff in a slow cooker that morning, and then by that night, the stew was done. I mean, that's just how we did it. Beans in slow cookers, whatever. And I guess it went to microwaves, but then they have microwaves, you have to process the food in so many ways. And so, yeah, I mean, so for the parents, I'm like, well, you can get pre-washed salad. And I mean, I live off a pre-washed salad. I don't have time to pick the lettuce. Now, when I was growing up, my grandmother said, go pick some mustards and want some this, that, go and pick it. The time. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, as you know, a lot of what we're working on with our new program for non-ultra processed foods is acknowledging that, time is such a big factor. And so we get the majority of our calories and nutrients from packaged foods. And it like our aim with that is to make sure that more of those packaged foods actually are nutritious. And I mean, doctors are increasingly calling a lot of what we eat not food, but processed edible substances. Like it's not even really technically food because the food matrix has been so destroyed, and then also all the additives. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting insight about time and just that that's a limiting factor. And I'm also curious about the dimension of, you spoke earlier to the importance of being in nature. And that feels like another big one to me of like, there's the time and then there's also like the will and the understanding of the importance of what we're putting into our bodies. And how I think about it a lot is like food is our most direct connection to nature for a lot of us. It is literally this eating is this act where we are building our bodies from the body of the earth. And there is this opportunity in that for us to come back into that remembering and belonging. But for people who don't have any experience of being in nature or being connected to the natural world, I think that's harder to experience. And like just the sense of well-being that comes from being in nature. And I'm remembering a story you shared with me, and I don't remember the details. Maybe you could share it. But you talked about like all these trees near where you live being cut down and like the impact of that. Can you share that story?
Yeah, it was one of the stories that my godfather, I call him my spiritual father, he passed away, but he was a poet. And he and his childhood friends, they were friends since, I don't know, third grade. They lived in a part of Los Angeles, which was the historical jazz area of Central Avenue. And it's South, South Central so big. It's South Central, Southeast Los Angeles, a lot of crime, low income, not any trees. And they said, well, this was our neighborhood and was full of trees. And they just broke out in this whole poem about it started with the tree. So, and well, my spiritual dad passed away, but his best friend, I call her my aunt, she can't remember the story, but I'm like, it's a poem. You got to remember this poem. It's beautiful. But she tried to fill it in. But she was basically saying how they started with the trees, and it was just a regular working neighborhood that, the water truck will go past, you toot the horn, the ice cream truck will come, you get some popsicle, Uncle Bobo, whoever's playing dominoes, and you can sit with your friends under the trees. And one year, and this happened in LA, and I've seen it happen now, they came and tore down all the trees. They cut down all of the trees. And what happened after that? Crime rate went up. And I see it here. It's like, it's hot. There's no place for people to sit. There's no place for people just to breathe. You know what I mean? We have this symbiotic relationship with trees and oxygen. I go to one of our state parks here, and they call me, my family teases me to call me the park lady. Because I like going every day because they have these beautiful hiking trails and all these trees. And so the hiking trail has to be, when I do the whole thing, just at the park, because they're going to extend it all the way to the beach. It's going to be really cool. A bike trail, hiking trail, it's about 4 miles. So if I walk the whole hiking trail, and climbing and whatever, it's right in the middle of the city and it's beautiful, but you could just sit under a tree. And so that's important for your well-being because, talk about the science side. Well, fresh oxygen from the trees, okay? Other than that, it just gives your body a chance to reset and digest and just be. Be. And even if you had a hard day, I was sharing a story about with some young people because I work with youth. It was like, young people, they got a lot going on, especially nowadays. And I'm like, yeah, I was there. And one thing about farming would help me, and I realized the plants, you transfer the plant, they're down, you look down and the spiritual side is where your ancestors are. You're buried in the ground. And pretty soon, like the plant, you'll get stronger and you'll lift your head up towards the sun. And that gives you another day. Everything's going to be okay. Because I have to talk to young people all the time, and I think that's what parks do for me to help me reset and digest and just be. And so one thing that we would try to do with the farming side of Caesar Carver and Centropy is remove some of the toxic hotspots areas around the park. So when the kids play, it's not full of lead and toxins. And the sunflowers work. They add a beautiful aesthetic. I mean, where our farm was near a freeway. So we lined the whole walkway with just sunflowers and just aesthetics of it all. I would just sit back and just watch people just sit there in the middle of sunflowers, just sit there. And that is so important to our well-being. And to, you can say, to our genetics and epigenetics, you know what I mean? So it's just, we need, a time to, to just be, and that's so important.
Are you saying you also planted the sunflowers for bioremediation?
Yes, we did.
How does that part work?
So I read this article. They did this in Chernobyl, where they had the radiation exposure, and also someplace in India. And so, part of science is just having fun, right? So I had this youth group, and we were like, let's just plant these sunflowers and we'll just give them away at the local farmers market. And so, and the youth made this beautiful pamphlet, like, this is for my future. Take a sunflower, plant it. This is what sunflowers do. They take out toxins from the soil, lead, and they have these little microbes on their leaves that take toxins from the air. So we decided to take, the walkway, the part of the grass on the other side of the sidewalk. We just lined the whole area with some of the giant sunflowers, some of the native California sunflowers, all of these different species of sunflowers. And
there's so many kinds of sunflowers. Many different kinds.
Yeah. And so, sunflowers, and bees and birds, they propagate. So you got flowers popping up here, popping up there. So the kids spilled a whole seed of sunflowers. Like, how do we get sunflowers here? Oh, you spilled that back? Then we got sunflowers growing here. And so when we would have a Saturday open house, or Saturday open up the garden or farm on Saturdays, some people would just come and sit amongst the sunflowers.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of when we were talking earlier about just everything you're saying about Centropy and like energetic coherence, and how much, like, my experience of being with trees and plants is that they do have their coherence intact. And so, like, energetically sharing space with them, it like invites my being back into that same coherence. That's so nourishing and subtle and easy, like you're saying, and can be beautiful. Just like relax in the trees, relax with the flowers. And
I love that. And I would like to say that I know that you farm. You've probably heard Three Sisters, right? Where you plant the corn. Well, we have a saying, we call it Four Sisters. We include the sunflower because the sunflower removes the toxin around the squash, the corn. What is it? Squash, corn, and something else.
Beans.
Yeah, beans. Then you add sunflowers because they remove the toxins. They help prepare the soil for the next year, and they should be added. Yeah.
You're making me realize I don't think we planted any sunflowers this year. We have a lot of flowers going. I have hollyhocks blooming right now, and the dahlia is starting. I'm really fortunate to live in a place where there's a lot of nature around me. But like, you're really making me miss the sunflowers right now. And I actually didn't know about the bioremediation. That's so cool.
Yeah, on the science side of me, we actually tested the soil before and after, and it released the amount of lead, at least four times less lead in the soil.
Cool.
And there is a native California sunflower that doesn't require as much water. So we're going to be working more with that and other native California plants. Because people were like, what about the water? Fortunately, it was around the time where we had a lot of rain anyways. And the sunflowers, they find a way to survive. They do. They come up every year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, probably also with, like you're saying, different varieties. And where I am up in Bellingham, Washington, we have a lot of water in the ground. So yeah, I love that you, like, of course you did, tested to see what was the effect on the actual bioremediation, but it's making me think back to your first story and interest about filtering water, and it's kind of full circle. So
yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as we wrap up, the name of this podcast is FutureKind, and a lot of it is, the focus is us learning together about how do we become the humans that the future needs, humans who know how to tend life and be in relationship, which is, everything you've been talking about. I'm curious, as we wrap up, if you have any final thoughts you want to share about what you see as really imperative for us to be FutureKind. Like, what do we need to be valuing, thinking about, and or doing to be in good relationship with life?
I would say I think the two main things that we talked about in time and being in a relationship of, and I did some work in Tanzania, and I was able to work with an organization that taught young moms. And one thing, and some of these moms lived out in the village. They weren't in the main city. And so the time was an issue because I didn't understand how this one tribe set time. And so Tanzania is by is closer to the equator. So the sun always comes up at 6 and always sets around 6, maybe plus or minus 30 minutes. So at 6 o'clock, that's their 1 o'clock in the morning. 7 o'clock is 2 o'clock in the morning. 8 o'clock. So they use this 24-hour time based on the sun. I was like, that's interesting. Because when someone said, I'll be there at 4, I'm like, 4 p.m.? Right? I was like, they didn't understand the time. But talking to people and really discussing it, it's like, that's so important. So when you wake up, that is your moment. When the sun comes up, that's your 1 o'clock. That's your present. And so how are you going to be in relationship with your present moment? How are you be in relationship with the trees, with your friends, with your family? That affects the well-being of everybody and the planet. So time is relationship, I guess.
I love that. What did you... I love that you brought up your time in Tanzania too. I'm just curious, like, related to what you're saying about time and relationship, besides just the clock being different, like, did you notice any other differences there about time and relationship? I'm guessing that it's quite different than how it is in U.S. culture, and there might be some good inspiration and
things are so laid back.
To leave us on that. Yeah.
I've come there in my United States speaking about time, and they're like, everything's going to be okay. That's where the word, what's it, Hakuna Matata comes from. It's like, everything's okay. Yeah. And I'm like, but we got to do this at this time. But it's so weird. It does work out. It just does work out. It's when it is time, things show up at the right times. That's all I can say.
And it's like a choice to be available to living that way, right? Because if, like, we're only thinking about clock time, then that kind of flow, things don't necessarily show up at the right time because we're not letting them.
We're not letting them. So, some other friends from the U.S. used to get so frustrated, like, this meeting started 2 hours later. But we learn, like, when the right souls, the right people show up, that is the right time.
Yeah.
And it's much more productive. And I don't know. It's just, I learned so much. I just learned so much. Just to sit had some tea, discuss some things, and things that it gets done. It doesn't mean that no one's respecting your time or anyone is not there. There's stereotypes that come with it. And now I know how inappropriate those stereotypes are. I mean, all stereotypes are inappropriate, but really, if you understood the real meaning of time, then you would because our physical body is only attached to Earth with a set amount of time. That's it. So we're connected to the sun, and our melatonin and serotonin is all connected to the sun, and so to speak. You sleep at night because of melatonin. You're awake because of serotonin. Your serotonin is down at night. Our circadian rhythm is connected to the earth. We're all connected. So we used to live a time where preparing our foods, growing our food, sitting down, eating our food was all connected to time that we still have. We just had to figure out how to do it.
I love that so much. And I feel inspired to I do think a lot about, we release these podcast episodes on the new moon. I think a lot about what are the ways that we can be in relationship with time that aren't just clock driven. What can we see from natural cycles? But I am really appreciating what you're adding into that about time as relationship. Which even after you had explained a little when you first said that, I was like, can I really grok what that means? But I'm excited to now just and I invite listeners too, let's reflect on and experience what might that mean for us? And if we track as our priority for informing the rhythm and flow of our lives is the relational fields happening around us as opposed to what's happening on the clock, what does that make possible?
Yeah, I mean, you would think the people work so long hours there, but this is different. You may start at 7 or 8, but you may take a nap for 1 to 3, but your kids are coming in, but you still finish up a meeting, you're eating and you're having tea as a, working family thing. It's so different. I just learned a lot, it made work-life experience different. It wasn't I got to do this, I got to do this work. It's my life is my work, So if my kids are here, let's have some tea first. Okay, what were we talking about? You think this is on my whole day, but it's hard to explain.
It's all it sounds like it's all more integrated.
It's more integrated, but there's a lot of downtime too. There's a lot of downtime. Yeah. It's not these set things your kids are at school, I work here. Okay, my kid's not feeling good, I'm bringing them to work. It's totally normal. Let's make a pallet for the kid here. This kid is sleeping, or I can go take my kids and go, and then I'll come back. It's totally normal.
You don't have to pretend to not be a human.
Yeah. Okay, the babysitter has to come. I got to do this. We got to eat in 30 minutes, and I got to hop on a Zoom call. That doesn't happen. I don't know if we can change that in this country.
Well, it's interesting because I feel with remote work, there are more possibilities. I had my children before, when I still needed to go into an office. And I just think about that for we just had, we have a lot of, we call them butterfly babies. We have a lot of moms of young kids working at the Non-GMO Project. And we our most recent edition was just a week ago. And I just feel it's still hard. It's hard to work and take care of a baby at the same time. So acknowledging that, but I'm just so happy that we are in this paradigm now where the moms can stay with their little ones all day, and they're all learning how to use Zoom at a young age.
Yeah.
But still, I'm hearing you that so I think there's potential depending on the intention in a workplace culture. We have more potential than we used to invite in that kind of flow and integration of take a nap or step away and, care for your children. And it doesn't have to all be so segmented, but I know that's still not quite the norm yet. So
it's it's a lot better with my kids were young, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate the inspiration around that. And yeah, we'll be thinking about time as relationship. Thank you so much, Rasheeda. It was really good to be with you today.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on FutureKind. Remember, every choice we make ripples through the web of life. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious, and keep making choices that nourish FutureKind. FutureKind is brought to you by the Non-GMO Project and the Food Integrity Collective. New episodes emerge with each new moon. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform and share your FutureKind moments with us on social media using #FutureKind. Music by Yaima, Masaru Higasa, and Pepper Proud. Rise Ceremonia 6.